Stop. Talk to me.
Welcome back to Stop and Talk.
Thank you, Crystal. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am good. We just had a terrific conversation with Norma Chávez-Peterson from the ACLU, who leads the local affiliate here in San Diego, and fascinating conversation.
Yeah, I think many of us have known Norma Chávez-Peterson for a number of years.
You've known her a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think her commitment to organizing and community is something we can all learn from. So I'm excited to dive in on this one.
Yeah. Well, why don't we do that? Why don't
right.
we just dive right in and listen to the conversation, and we'll have a lot to talk about at the back end.
Yeah. See you on the other side.
All right. All right. Norma Chávez-Peterson, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Grant.
Yeah. This is an important conversation in terms of what's happening in San Diego and what's happening nationally. But I do want to start by asking you to say a bit about, for those of our audience who understand or perhaps don't understand the ACLU, what does your work actually look like here in San Diego, and in the context of what you're doing nationally?
ACLU, right, the American Civil Liberties Union, was founded in 1920, and it's a national federated organization. So a lot of people just think of ACLU and don't understand our structure. What's beautiful about the ACLU is not only our 120-something years, but the fact that we have a presence in every single state in this country and Puerto Rico. And we're a federated organization, which means that we're made up of affiliates. So I have really the honor and the privilege to lead our local affiliate, which is our ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties. California is complex. We have 3 affiliates. But the role of the affiliates, the way I see it, Grant, is we're really the eyes and ears and boots on the ground in local communities when it comes to defending, protecting, and advancing civil rights and civil liberties. And so we have that presence in every single state. And in California, because we're so huge, we're broken up by 3 affiliates. And so I have the 2 southernmost counties in our state, right in the border region. And I feel like that gives us the opportunity to be even more rooted in community.
That structure is designed then to let each affiliate express the particular needs and opportunities of that place. Is that right?
Exactly. Really, again, our role is to be super connected to what's happening on the ground and to be responsive to that, to identify our own kind of issue priorities. And I think, especially in this moment, you know, a lot of what we're facing in terms of, you know, the threats to democracy, to due process, those are things that we have to fight at all levels, right? Whether it's in the Supreme Court or in local city council meetings and local town, school board meetings, et cetera. And so that's the role of the affiliates. Like, let's do the work locally.
So we're going to get into all of that, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
But before we do, I would love to hear from you about what drew you to this work in the first place, why you wanted to do this as your career.
I was born in Michoacan, Mexico. I'm an immigrant to California. I came to this country when I was 5.5 years old, and I was raised by a single immigrant mother. I was undocumented until 1986, Ronald Reagan's, Immigration, Reform Act that created the path for close to 3 million folks to get a path to legalization. So I would say that my lived experience as an immigrant, as undocumented family that's really lived kind of in poverty or grew up in poverty here in San Diego really informed and shaped my commitment to being involved in social change, social justice. And so that's been my entire life's career, has been community organizing and advocacy. And, now at the ACLU for almost 15 years.
Amazing. Well, and so well known and so well respected in this community for the role that you play in that. So you chose your career well, and what what a fascinating and direct through line in terms of the immediacy of the issues that we're facing in our society right now. Do you sometimes feel as though you were made for this moment?
I really do feel like I think, one, my lived experience, but also my work, right? And so in those decades of work, because, it's now been, I guess, like 3 decades. I really started organizing in when I was in high school, right? And I think all of the work that's been rooted in mostly low-income communities of color in this county. And then the work that I did prior to ACLU, I did faith-based organizing. So I really, through JOB, Justice Overcoming Boundaries, and that work I really think prepared me for it. Because I was raised, in National City, Chula Vista, South Bay, where if you go to those communities, it's majority Latino, right? And it's majority communities of color. And I really think that my 8 years of faith-based organizing and working with folks across the region, across faith, across class, across race, and working really around different issues really is what prepared me to lead the ACLU because it put me in close proximity and relationship with really amazing people that maybe weren't people of color and weren't poor and had privilege, but were committed to social change. And that really, I think, prepared me for this moment.
So let's talk about this moment and dive right in. And I think we'll inevitably go back and forth between national and local national issues, local manifestations of it. And maybe a place to begin is the national, what the country was exposed to in terms of federal overreach through the lens of the ICE enforcement actions in Minneapolis, when we had people being shot on the streets for protesting and allegedly being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had infringements of protesters' rights. We had a level of enforcement action that many in the country saw for the first time as being beyond the pale. What people don't necessarily see is how this is manifesting in their own communities. And I'd just love for you to reflect for a moment about what has been going on here in San Diego and how we're experiencing this in what ways.
Yeah. So I want to step back even further back than just this administration, because I think, we're a border region, we're a binational region, and issues of federal government overreach, whether it's Border Patrol or ICE, are absolutely not new. Yeah. I talked about my own path to legalization in the 80s. It was really in the 80s that the militarization of the border region began to occur. And so, so deaths on the border, killings at the hands of border. So I want to note that because I do think that it's something that if you talk to folks that have been documenting human rights abuses or have been working in the immigrant rights space, folks know that this has been happening for decades and that it's not new and that it's not just this administration. It's been every single administration since the 80s. So again, to me, this is not a partisan issue. This is about kind of the state of our national politic in terms of how we see and or want to treat immigrants and whether or not we want to be a welcoming nation.
You mentioned, and I appreciate that answer. I think it's such an important framing because we've been, in some ways you're saying we've been building to this moment for a long time. There have been moments in our history, even our recent history, where the country has been able to think through that we need a comprehensive solution to immigration. And I'm curious how you view that conversation through the ACLU's lens, why we adhere simply to militarization and to these excesses and are not making progress on the comprehensive solution.
Yeah, I think, this is it's not a tough question, but it's a complex question because I think part of the reality is that it has been challenging to get the rest of the country or everyone to align around, what a just, fair, and humane immigration system might look like, even in other times when there's been movement for immigration reform. We've seen that really the majority of the country, and I don't remember the numbers right now because there's been polling, but I think like 60 or 70% of Americans actually believe that there should be common sense, comprehensive immigration reform, and that you really have a couple folks that maybe don't fully understand it or don't know, maybe aren't impacted, and that you really have 10% of like staunch anti-immigrant, I'll say many white nationalist folks that really don't want any more immigration in this country. But that's the minority. I mean, again, I've been doing this work in immigrant rights for a long time. But what has happened in the last 10 years or more, I mean, from Trump 1.0 to now, is that 10% has been really loud. And they also obviously are dominating the political dynamics of our time. And so I really do think that the moment we're in right now has been taken over by that 10%. However, what we've seen in the last year, which we could talk about Operation Metro Surge, right, in Minnesota and Chicago, but we could also talk about Buena Froqueta in South Park.
We'll say something about that, please.
So, I'll step back again and say, like, look, we all knew from just the campaigning, the rhetoric of the 2024 presidential election and the last election, that immigration was going to be that wedge issue that was going to be used to divide and to promote a narrative of fear and division. So we knew what this current administration was threatening to do, right? We not only from the debates and the deport them all signs at the conventions, but Project 2025. So there was no doubt what they were preparing for.
Right.
The election happens, the inauguration happens, and on the day of the inauguration, the first thing that the administration signs is an end to birthright citizenship. Fast forward a couple months later, and I really do believe that the incident we saw at Buena Froqueta, a Friday evening, I believe it was in May or June of last year, families celebrating graduations and other family functions at Buena Froqueta. Many of us love that place in South Park.
Right.
And on a Friday
very
evening.
Very popular local restaurant.
Yes, very popular and a great neighborhood in San Diego. And what happens? You have this excessive, abusive, total militarized ICE presence that handcuffs all of the workers. I mean, people that were enjoying dinner were in shock. Yes, they were looking for a couple of workers. The business, who's an immigrant-run business, Italian-owned, was also impacted. But you also saw how the neighbors responded. And, you don't mess with South Park. There's so many amazing, great humans there. Yeah. And you saw elders. You saw young families, yelling. I don't think people were prepared for that. But I think that was this administration's, beginning to test out this really vile, excessive, brute force in terms of how they're doing immigration enforcement. So that happened, again, I remember if it was May or June, and then it moved on to LA. So you saw that targeting of cities and you saw community response. And so, I don't think it's new. I think it's very intentional. I mean, one of the things they said in terms of targeting immigrants was, deport them all. They wanted to have quotas of 1 million a year.
So the way this, and I really appreciate the historical perspective because I think it's important to understand that we've been, for decades now, the country has been avoiding dealing with comprehensive immigration reform and instead indulging in this broken debate and behaving in the ways that we've seen, culminating in what this administration is doing. So thank you for reminding us of that. Now, though, the way the conversation gets framed is if you care about borders, you have to do this stuff. And people who are fighting for the rights of immigrants don't care about borders. And I'm curious how you talk about this as you talk to audiences about what your real perspective is as opposed to the cartoonish way in which it gets characterized sometimes by the opposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality, right, and ACLU's, formal position is like, look, every country has a right, to have borders, et cetera, and all of those things, right? Like we have a right as a sovereign nation to have that. I think how we do that, how we secure our borders, how we, manage immigration in our country is what is needed for us to actually wrestle with. But it's really a false narrative. It's again, this narrative that's intended to just divide and to make a very complex issue very simple. And it's easier to say, well, those immigrant rights advocates, they just want open borders. I mean, I will say there are folks within the immigrant rights movement that don't believe we have borders. That's not the majority of folks. I mean, it's like the majority of folks is like, yes, a country has a right to have, rules and laws. However, our current immigration system is completely out of touch with not only the needs, not only the impact it has on families, right? But also like our economic needs and our, just everything else. And so I do think that like from our perspective, there is a way for our Congress, if they had the courage. There's been many other iterations, and it was actually during George Bush. There was some efforts during Obama. We have DACA. There's been a lack of willingness and political courage at the congressional level to actually pass bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. And I think I'm hoping that, given the moment that we're in, I think there's an opportunity for us to build, to continue to see how we bring more folks on board and create a real vision for once we get past this administration, how do we actually really address this issue in a comprehensive and humane and dignified way?
I definitely want to talk about that. That's something we should explore a bit. Before we get to it, though, let's come back to the local reality. What's happening here in San Diego? So you mentioned the incident at Buena Forchetta, which many have characterized as a kind of training run for what then has unfolded elsewhere around the country. In terms of the militarized intrusion into people's schools and homes and businesses. Is that ongoing here in San Diego?
Yeah. I think that was probably the first and only incident where we saw that level of force. What we have seen, and it was Cal Matters that just a few weeks ago released, a report. They analyzed some data around ICE arrest and reported that ICE arrest and detentions in San Diego County are up 1,500%. So what we're seeing in San Diego is not that overt, aggressive that we've seen in Minneapolis, but we are seeing increased arrest. And I'll share a couple of examples, right?
Yeah,
early on last year. And so it's happening. It's a little quieter, but communities are responding. And one of the first examples that comes to mind of early last year, and this video went viral, was a young woman. I don't remember if she's like 19 or 20, but a young person whose, ICE agents went to her house. This was in Escondido, and they were banging on the door. They were looking for her uncle. And this young woman actually knew her rights. She had just attended a Know Your Rights. And she actually said, do you have a judicial warrant? Through the screen door, and they didn't have one. And they're like, no, we don't have one. Bottom line, she didn't open the door. And then they were trying to kind of intimidate her. And then she literally read her little red card and said, no, we're not going to open the door and have the right to not open the door. So you began to see these, they were doing targeted arrests, people that maybe had a formal deportation order. Part of their narrative is we're going after criminals. The data shows less than 1% are actually have any kind of violent crime. Everybody still has a right to due process. But what we have seen is either people that, maybe had, I don't know, an
They're
infection.
going after the abuelas and not the criminals.
Not the criminals. I mean, we saw another incident in Encinitas. Forget the name of the local store. It was all over the news as well, of he's an immigrant. He's going through immigration status. He's, dealing with his immigration process, but has owned a little store in Encinitas. And all of a sudden he got picked up. And the entire community of Encinitas that goes shops there, was, in an uproar and saying, why are you taking our neighbor? And so, this is happening where people are dropping off their children at school. We've heard about it in City Heights and Chula Vista and Oceanside. We saw a super vile, I think. This was another kind of, I think, really excessive, brute incident in Oceanside where immigration and agents went in to they were looking for the father. They ended up taking not only the father and the mother like at 5, 6 in the morning, but they broke the windows, and they left these teenage children by themselves. Like it's happening here, right? So many times, we'll hear about it in the news, we'll see it on social media, but there's absolutely no doubt. And not only is the data there, but the stories are there that they're targeting people. And many times they say they're targeting criminals, but they're just racially profiling, right? We've heard of stories of folks driving on their way to work because they're construction workers, right? And they're picked up on their way to work, and then they leave their car there, right? And then families are trying to find them. Like these are things that are happening literally all over the county every day.
And according to the data, at rates much higher than anybody realizes or suspects.
Yeah. It does. And I will say that there's, in this moment, there's so many people in our community. And that's one of the things I love about San Diego is that, not everybody's has an immigrant in their family, but I do think that more that people are seeing what's happening, people are volunteering. They're forming neighborhood patrols. They're like the PTAs are like, outside of the school to see. I've heard of churches. I know a couple churches who, because they want churches to be a safe space for people to go worship and to feel safe. And so they have other members of the congregation who are U.S. citizens who are volunteering to be eyes and ears on a Sunday to just keep an eye out so that people feel safe. And so that to me is also what's happening in our community is that you have everyday people trying to figure out ways that they can protect and, their neighbors and at least be eyes and ears.
Yeah. So there's so many questions that I want to explore on this, but because I think there's so much to understand here, the community response tells me that at the community level, people see something that the national policymakers are missing. And the national policymakers dismiss it as people being overly compassionate. And we've heard that argument being made. What I think that community reaction expresses is that people in community are seeing something that national policymakers who are behind these policies are not. They're seeing something in the value of their neighbors. It is dismissed often by the by the administration and those who support it as just misplaced compassion. In community, people see it as an expression of what they believe about themselves as Americans and about community. You spoke earlier about how it's okay to have and important to have immigration laws and a border, but how you enforce it is important. So what is the administration missing in its how that communities are seeing here in San Diego?
Well, this particular administration, I think, is missing all of it because it's very clear from not only their statements, but, Stephen Miller's advice that they're completely want to dismantle any sense of, welcoming immigrants or just like having, a country that actually is multiracial and multi-ethnic and all of that. I feel like at the end of the day, there's no question in my mind. And I think people see it. And I think that's why you have so many folks, including in places like Minnesota, right? Think of Minnesota, right? How many immigrants actually are there? And then the state, and you see so many folks that are out in negative 11-degree weather, protesting, singing in choirs, because I think it pulled at the heartstrings of who we are as a country. Like that's not who we are, to to exclude and to vilify and to dehumanize and to criminalize. That's not, I think that it's striking a chord with a lot of people that this is not who we are. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading a New York Times story yesterday where they went through the Supreme Court justices to tell the story of their immigrant story.
Background, yeah.
Their immigrant background. And part of it is, right, obviously, unless you're Native American and you're African American connected to, you know, your ancestors being brought here by force, everyone has an immigrant story, right? Including our Supreme Court justice, including the president,
Very much so.
including Stephen Miller. But it's been this wanting to disconnect from that immigrant story that's fundamental to who we are as a country.
Yeah. So the failure to remember that, resulting in these stronger enforcement actions that this administration is pursuing, and language and rhetoric that demonizes immigrants, and actions designed to send them anywhere else, is having what sort of effect on people in local communities?
I think in local communities, I'm seeing here in San Diego more and more people that are appalled at what is happening, maybe because, again, they weren't directly impacted, but like, this is not okay with me.
But for the ones who, I see the same thing around communities stepping up to protect others in their midst. But for the folks who are afraid that they may be next or that their family may be next, what sort of changes are happening to them as a result?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what is happening is that, and I think a little bit about like the threats or the attacks on immigrants is also an attack on all of us. I mean, we're seeing how this administration is not only picking up folks based on the color of their skin and whether they work certain jobs, but also U.S. citizens that might be exercising their First Amendment right to document, right? To take pictures and videos and to speak, right? Like journalists, like they're really kind of going after anybody that might be critical of this administration. And that's where I think more and more people are saying, okay, I might be next, right? Maybe I'm a U.S. citizen, but maybe my spouse is not. Or I have certain political opinions and I might be on their target list. So I do think that this moment is getting folks to be thinking about the bigger picture, about the threats to all of our individual rights and individual freedoms to express ourselves and have an opinion.
We hear stories about families who are afraid to go to church or to go to the grocery store or to go to work because of just what you described, that they worry they may be next. And we've also seen people turn out for protests in record numbers. How are you seeing people calibrate their personal safety in this environment?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot based on your own personal risk, right? Like if you talk to someone who is undocumented, like them balancing their risk with someone who is a U.S. citizen, et cetera, it's like a completely different calculation. What I think we are hearing and seeing is many folks who might be without status or in mixed status, not only maybe afraid to go to church, but also maybe not even showing up to their doctor's appointments. My sister's a teacher in San Isidro, right? It's been teaching at the same school for 29 years. And right after the administration, I mean, she's teaching second graders. And was telling me that, like, especially the first months right after the inauguration, where she had so many kids that were missing school. And a lot of that because their parents were like even afraid to take their kids to school. So you're seeing that play out in all aspects of our everyday life, going to the doctor, going grocery shopping. And there are community groups that are even delivering groceries to folks that are so afraid to leave their homes. And I'll say, like, all of us navigate fear differently, right? So there might be some folks, because there are folks that are courageous and that are in community and are resilient and are saying, you know what, we're going to do this together and I'm not alone, and they have a plan. And there are folks that are so afraid that they don't even want to leave their house.
Right.
And so I think you have kind of a broad range of that. And then in terms of like the protests, and, I was at the third No Kings this last weekend, and it was great, right? Like we saw the first No Kings was like 5 million people, I think 7 million. And I think they estimate 8 million people from across the country that took to the streets. And if you attend, it is so diverse. It's intergenerational. There's like elders in their 90s. And, I saw a video of a senior home. And I think the folks from Casa de Mañana or something in La Jolla, they organized their own little walkout, outside of their senior facility. So you see seniors, you see young people. My teenage daughter was out there with me this last weekend. And so it's intergenerational, it's diverse. And I will say you see a lot more white folks out there, which honestly we need.
Say more about why.
Because I think in this moment, like if immigrants, if people of color, if Black, Indigenous folks, we have the biggest target on our back.
Right.
This is a moment for good allies, for people that want to put their bodies. And I mean, honestly, that's what Renee Good and Alex Preddy were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, a nurse and a mom and a wife that just dropped off their kids was figuring out what they could do to keep an eye out for their neighbors. And so you're seeing that more and more. And I really think that in this moment, there's an opportunity for us to continue to build bridges in communities and build relationships.
I think that's a really powerful point. One of the other groups that we're seeing being attacked right now is, it's truth tellers of various sorts, but we're seeing journalists being attacked and attempts to shut them down. And for reporting on these stories and sharing information, we've seen efforts to keep observers out of courthouses, actually to turn observers into criminals by describing them as terrorists for bearing witness, in effect. How do you see this moment as having importance for the civil liberties of all of us?
What this administration wants to do is instill fear and division by any means necessary. So whether it's going after journalists or Jimmy Kimmel or the legal observers here at our own courthouse, the faith volunteers of San Diego Organizing Project or Detention Resistance who have been there since last August, they started getting citations just a couple weeks ago to be deterred. You've had the Catholic bishop going out to the courthouse, right? So what they want to do, and this is where authoritarianism will thrive, is if we stay quiet, if we don't speak up, if we just, give up. And I think that's what they're really trying to do at this moment. But what we're seeing is that people are determined and very resilient, and are continuing to speak up and speak out and challenge what is happening.
There are so many things happening, and this is one of the strategies, actually, but there's so many things happening that it is hard for people to decide this is the thing I should pay attention to and this is something I should ignore. And when you look at it from your very informed perspective, where should we focus our energy, and what is just a distraction?
Yeah, that's a great question, because even, us as an organization, we've been super intentional. Think about everything that we've experienced this year. We're talking about civil rights and civil liberties, but the, undoing of the federal, employees, everything. To me, everything's under attack. And I think, to your point, it's intentional. So I think both as organizations and as individuals, what do you care the most about? You can't focus on everything. There's a saying in Spanish, and I'll say it. El que mucho abarca, poco aprieta. I'll repeat it. El que mucho abarca, poco aprieta. He, she, or they that takes on too much does very little. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is focus. Everybody has to, do a little bit of reflection, of discernment, of like, what is that issue that I care the most about, that is really in my heart, that I want to fight back on. Maybe it's immigrant rights. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's what's happening right now with the dismantling of our healthcare system and Medi-Cal. Like, find the issue that you care the most about, and then connect with an organization. Of course, I would love for everyone to like join the ACLU, but there's so many amazing organizations, right? Get involved. If you're a person of faith, are you involved in your faith community? Do you all have a social justice ministry? Do you know San Diego Organizing Project? Like, we can't do it all, but this is where it's important to figure out what you care the most about and where you can have the most, and then focus on that. And then, of course, everything is connected. And this is, to me, super important too, is that we're clear about what we're focused on, but that we're also in relationship, right, with other organizations that are tackling other issues. Because at this moment, our strength is in our unity. It is in our solidarity, and it's in our ability to be strategic in terms of how we're pushing back without getting burned out and not being effective.
You started to answer this question, but I'd just love for you to say a few more words about it. How can communities prepare themselves so that they're ready if the heat turns up and the level of enforcement action becomes more overt, militarized, aggressive, and in the damaging ways we've seen? How can communities prepare themselves? What are the pieces of infrastructure that they need to put in place to respond?
So one is, know your neighbors, right? Depending on where you live, whether it's North Park, whether it's Chula Vista, whether it's Oceanside, there's folks that are already doing work there. So, find out who's already doing work in the neighborhood you live in. Figure out what you can plug into. Like, you're not alone, and there's already a lot of work happening. So I think starting there, right, with knowing your neighbors and knowing who's doing what in your own local kind of neighborhood and community, I think is important. In terms of infrastructure, there's lots of infrastructure, and we're continuing to build more infrastructure collectively. The ACLU just launched last week, I think, or the week before, legal intake lines specific to report, abuse at the hands of federal law enforcement. Part of it is in preparation. Like, if one of the things we heard from our colleagues in Minnesota when things were really bad was that the ability to capture not just videos and pictures and documentation, to document what was actually happening, and then obviously investigating as quickly as possible to build a record, and then, of course, use litigation when it makes sense to file lawsuits challenging, whether it was excessive use of force or racial profiling. So we do have this hotline now. I can share the numbers with your team so that we could share that with the audience, because I think if, it were to get escalated, and again, it's happening now, we want the community to have a centralized way to report abuses, and then our legal team is capturing all that information and doing that due diligence. So that's one way. There's also, we're working with several partners, again, because there's a lot of really important work, is immigration legal services is really important. This is for immigrants that might be impacted by mass deportation, right? There's the Legal Defense Fund that the County of San Diego that we advocated for. It's $5 million locally. And then there's a coalition of nonprofit providers. So knowing where are the resources that you can direct people to is really important. And we're currently working with some really important partners that are leading work to build what we're calling a San Diego Regional San Diego Regional Solidarity Collective that is really looking at the entire kind of ecosystem of organizations and trying to create like a little bit more connective tissue, so that if anybody gets a call that a parent from Escondido got picked up at Home Depot, that there's that they know who to connect to, so that family can have support. So that is still all getting developed. with partners, but the goal is to build more of that connective tissue so that not only we can provide support and respond in the moment, but that we could be prepared in case there is increased enforcement.
So thank you for that answer. I think that answer is, in some ways what you're describing is using this moment to build and strengthen community. I'm also thinking about the unique role that people who, we all think so much about what we can do, and we have a penchant for doing that is admirable in this country. But I'm also seeing the rise of a very old technique that has a religious tradition of bearing witness and using this moment not simply to protest or to vote but to actively be a witness to what is happening. And that feels very passive. So for many of us, it feels insufficient. And yet, arguably, it was very important in turning the tide in Minneapolis and Minnesota more generally. Why do you think it's important now? And similar question: why are authorities who are pushing this agenda threatened by people who are just there to see?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful right now, and I think it's an opportunity for people of good conscience, and people that care about not just immigrants but their neighbors and care about democracy to be those that want to be prepared, to be observers and to document and to be the storytellers of what's happening on the ground. I'll say one of the things that there's lots again happening, but there's an organization in San Diego called Standing Up for Racial Justice. They were born after the incident of George Floyd in 2020, and they're a national organization, all volunteer, and they're really focused on, standing up for racial justice. Again, to me, like the issues we're seeing in terms of what's impacting immigrant communities, again, it's intersectional. Like the excessive law enforcement and the experience that African American communities have had in our own community around racial profiling and excessive use of force at the hands of law enforcement, again, is not new. And so this is an opportunity, I think, to get communities to learn more about what's happening, to connect with each other. But Surge in particular has been doing trainings in community to do, I think they call it bystander trainings. And it's also intended to be, for white allies, for people that might not be directly impacted, but, how do you? And there's this whole framework that they have. They actually connected with some of the folks that were doing the training in Minnesota for folks that were going to be, documenting or observing or what was happening in the ground in communities. And so Surge has been doing some of those trainings. There's many other organizations that also do it. And I think it's an opportunity for folks to, again, those that are willing to do it, because not everybody wants to take that risk. But I do think that it's a good opportunity and tool to get folks, out there if they're able to.
Our audience includes philanthropists. It also includes nonprofit leaders, civic leaders of various types, and many, many others. People who are in positions to argue for various types of change and to implement it. What would you hope they would be keeping in mind at a moment like this when all of this is going on?
Yeah, I think at this moment for leaders of whatever sector, whether it's a nonprofit sector, philanthropic sector, or even our local elected leaders, this is a moment for courageous leadership. This is not a moment to be comfortable. I don't know how you can be comfortable if you just watch the news and see what's happening to our neighbors. So I really think that at this moment calls all of us as leaders to be bold, to be courageous, to take risk, to also be innovative and willing to take some risk. Everybody has to manage their own risk, but this is a moment where we need to be thinking out of the box.
Yeah. So what is and I love that answer, but what does courageous leadership look like to you? Where have you seen it? And from either in this community or elsewhere, where leaders have stepped up in a way that was helpful during this crisis?
I mean, I just had a chance to have dinner with her, so I want to talk a little bit about Angelica Salas, who to me inspires me and is a courageous leader. Angelica Salas is the executive director of CHIRLA, which is based in LA, but they're really a national immigrant rights organization that now is also doing work in Mexico. And Angelica, like me, has been part of the immigrant rights movement for a long time. And so in LA, I feel like CHIRLA does a combination of not only direct services, right? They get government funding, not, for important work, like their immigration legal services. They also are doing leadership development and organizing and advocacy, and they have a C4, and I think everyone last year, and again, everybody needs to manage their risk, but everybody, I heard from a lot of organizations, including from elected leaders, without mentioning names, last year that were like, we don't want to be a target of this administration. We don't want to risk, losing funding. Guess what? We're all targets. And this was early on. Again, I won't mention names, but some of them are city council members in different local cities. Again, and it's this, we can't approach this moment with fear guiding us. Yes, we need to manage risk. If we're executives, we need, we have attorneys, we have to figure it out. But if you're operating out of fear, that's not good leadership. I'll give you an example. I have another organization, again, I won't mention names, does amazing work in the community, serves the community really well. But again, they get federal funding. So, and I get it. Again, I'm kind of speaking from a point of privilege because we don't do direct services and get no government funding. And so there's this whole fear of like, we don't know what to do. Please don't use my work email, all this stuff about how can we support immigrant families. I was like, how about you just figure out those 5,000 families that you are doing X, Y, and Z services for? How about you figure out how to connect them to a family preparedness plan and immigration legal services? I'll tell you who's doing that. Just connect the dots. Just do that, and you're doing enough. So there's this whole all last year, I heard so much fear from so many different leaders. Then you have Angelica Salas, who was one of the organizations that targeted.
Yeah.
And what did Angelica do? She grounded herself in her mission, her values, the purpose of her organization. Of course, she's lawyered up. Right. But it's like, this is the moment where you can't just operate out of fear. You have to. So to me, she's an example of a courageous leader that inspires me.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I think your answer to the groups that were afraid that you were describing, you were naming for them a positive course of action where they acknowledged what was going on, who in their circle of caring was affected by it, and a service they could actually provide them to help them. And that may be what courage looks like in the moment. But pretending the issue isn't going on is not helpful. And I think to your point, I also hear you saying that there is no hiding right now.
And pretending like there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Figure out what you can do about it with the resources you have and from where you sit. That to me is courageous leadership, not assuming that it's not happening and then assuming like you have no power or no ability to do something.
And so I imagine for individuals who are listening, the answer is the same, that it's figuring out what you can do and doing that thing.
Yeah, definitely. Not everybody wants to go to a protest, but write to your elected officials. I also think in this moment, and, we're talking to a San Diego audience, this is an opportunity with what's happening at the federal government. I believe deeply that this is an opportunity for us in local communities to make sure that our school boards, that our city councils, that our county board of supervisors, that these elected offices that represent us really speak for us, and that we're holding them accountable to our values and our vision of the kinds of policies that really protect people and lift everyone up. And so to me, it's an opportunity too, in like, how do we make democracy work at the local level?
Yeah. So in some ways, that brings us full circle back to a statement you made early in this conversation about a sense you had that this current tumult was ultimately could lead us to a better place. And do you see an opportunity in this moment for good to come from bad?
Yeah, there's another saying in Spanish. I'll say it again: "No hay mal que por bien no venga." There's always something good that comes out of a bad moment. And I think in this moment in our country's history, we've been through other dark times. I mean, I don't need to give any of your listeners a history lesson in the history of this country, whether it was slavery and, Reconstruction. I mean, you name it, right? We've been through darker times, but I really do think that it's the power of the people, right? This American experiment in our democracy is about representative democracy. It's about we, the people, making sure it means all of us. And so I think the opportunity is to really engage people in the things that matter the most to them, and making sure that we're building community, organizing, and building alliances across organizations, across issues, so that we can continue to make sure that government works for all of us, and that we're creating the kind of not only local communities, but country that really lives up to our highest ideals.
What do you hope is the legacy of your work here?
Well, so I've been now at the ACLU. When I started at the ACLU, I'm not a lawyer. Everybody used to say,
So it was a surprise when I first learned.
Because everybody knows ACLU for our fierce litigation, but I'd say we're a membership organization. We do policy work, we do community organizing, we do coalition building, and so I think part of my legacy, when I came to the ACLU and the board hired me, I'm an organizer, and I think they hired me because of how well connected I am in community and because I'm a good organizer and good leader. But I want my legacy. I feel like our affiliate is probably the most diverse affiliate in the country in terms of our staff and our board. And what I want my legacy to be is that the Norma Chavez, the first Mexican immigrant to run an ACLU, built an organization that really transformed, the life of people that live in San Diego and Imperial counties for the better, making sure that everyone's rights are respected, and really fulfilling that promise of a real, true, equitable society where everybody could thrive and be who they are.
That's beautiful. And finally, last question, do you feel hopeful about that?
I'm hopeful. I have to be, because I mean, I think if I give up hope, then folks win. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we're going to get past this moment, and that we're going to look back at this time and we're going to say, you know what, we fought hard, and we're going to continue to fight, because this is the work for the rest of our lives. Yeah.
Well, Norma, I just want to say on behalf of our audience, which is an audience that cares about the work that you're doing, I want to say thank you for being the sort of leader who embodies exactly what you were describing during this conversation. And thank you for leading us through a difficult time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
That was a really solid interview, Grant.
That was a good conversation on a tough subject. And what I really appreciated about Norma was her clarity around the issues and the role of her organization. Also about the role the rest of us can play.
Yeah, I was really inspired by the role the rest of us could play, because she really reminded us, check in, what can you do? What are you passionate about? And make it happen. So I feel like she's trying to make it easier for us to engage.
Yeah, there was a sense of not expecting people to be perfect or to hold themselves to some standard of perfection, but like you said, to do what they can. And that was particularly, I think, resonant during the conversation about what courage looks like at the moment. I think she was saying, number one, there's no place to hide on these issues, so it's important to be clear about what you stand for and how you want to help. But she was also saying that do what you can as a mantra for leaders to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah. And the idea that we can't lead with fear,
Yeah.
I think it's a good and constant reminder. But I also appreciated, to kind of go back to that, she talked about making sure that we understood that this hasn't just been immigration enforcement in this moment, but it's been 40 years of this. It's been quieter. And so how do we intervene in that? I felt like she really pointed to that history.
I think that was a really important point, because what she was saying was we need a comprehensive solution. And decades of failure to arrive at that have led us to this moment where there's been this triumph of this really broken idea of who immigrants are and what they stand for and whether this country can survive without them. And so we clearly need that comprehensive solution. And she was also saying that as a result of the lack of that we have been building towards a more and more rigid, militarized sort of response to the enforcement actions that take place. That was, I think, valuable to reflect on. At the same time, she was acknowledging that what's going on now is extraordinary.
But it seemed like it's all the details that make the difference, right? The woman in Escondido who had her red card and just read the message, like, do you have a judicial warrant? You don't? I'm not going to open the door, right? Having family preparedness plans, which she's advising nonprofits to connect people with the right resources. All of these things that feel so basic can make such a difference in whether or not someone's taken or whether or not they have the right to have their civil rights protected and exercised.
Yeah. And I think for our audience, the ways in which she talked about what individual people could do really resonated. And I think are a useful guide. So we talked about bearing witness. We talked about community responses like taking food to people and reaching out to neighbors and looking out, being a lookout at the churches. And I, what I was struck by was, in many ways, what she was describing is just what we would normally call being a good neighbor and building community. And it's tragic that has to be applied in this way in this moment. But boy, so important and so constructive for the future of community. Because I think if people view their responsibilities that way, then they will be contributing to be building stronger community in the future.
Yeah. And then she sort of left us with different types of reminders of, this is not the first time, this is not the last time, but we can take something good from everything. So I really appreciate her acknowledging the opportunity of the moment.
I liked her two sayings that she shared in Spanish, and I really liked the idea that a person who feels like they have to do everything does very little. It's actually a good reminder for us. But I think for all of us, there are just things we should focus on to support each other and to support community and to be, good community members, good allies, good and present in this moment in history. This does feel like so much is at stake, and she was clear about that too. That there are threats to our civil liberties that they may be directed at the moment at Black and brown people, at immigrants, at journalists, but the implications are for all of us. And I thought the way she made that connection was really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Even when she acknowledged having a diverse set of folks in the protest, all those things matter. So I think I walk away feeling like there's so much we can do in this moment to help and change and move.
Well, thank you for doing this with me,
likewise,
as always. Yeah. And what a pleasure to engage with people like Norma and talk about how our community and other communities can respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Grant. And thanks, everyone, for stopping and talking.
Stop. Talk to me.